The 7 natural wonders of the world. More than 450,000 cubic gallons, that's 1,700 cubic meters of water, fall down these falls per second. However, at the time of making this video, the Iguazu Falls look like this. In today's video, we're going to talk about the toughest aspect of climate change. Right now, South America is suffering the most worrying drought in the last 70 years. This drought mainly affects Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And, believe me, we are talking about a crisis that could have brutal consequences, particularly in Argentina. Have you heard about the Paraná River? Many of you probably haven't ever heard of this river, but it is the backbone that links the entire region. We are not talking just about agriculture, but also electric power and transportation. In other words, a drought experienced by this river can have catastrophic consequences in these countries. But are we really talking about such a serious crisis? In this video, we're going to tell you all about it. Argentina is famous for tango, Peronism, and the Argentine pampas, those huge agricultural fields that are the backbone of the national economy. However, you know the saying, if something can go wrong in Argentina, it will go worse. Here on VisualPolitik, we have told you all the details of Argentina's debacle, from the massive exodus of companies to its catastrophic policy for dealing with the coronavirus. However, there was one thing that still worked in this country: agriculture. To give you an idea, Argentina is the 3rd largest producer of soybeans on the planet. And believe me, Argentine soybeans are sold all over the world. They're not only used to make soy milk and dietary products, they are also the main food for farm animals. And Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay are among the main producers. These soybeans are grown in the pampas, which are mainly irrigated by the waters of the Paraná River. Once harvested, the beans are transported in boats that also go down the Paraná River. That is, instead of using trucks, barges are used where tons of grain can be transported up and down the river. Almost the entire economy of these 3 countries depends, to a large extent, on river transport. However, you know the saying, if something can go wrong in Argentina, it will go worse.
Worst drought in a century hits Brazil as it fights to overcome COVID.
But is this really such a disaster? What are the real consequences of this drought? What exactly is happening in Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay? Today, we're going to answer all of these questions, but first, let's talk about LatAmPolitik. What's more, those of you who are already subscribed to LatAmPolitik already know a good part of this story, because we are telling it in real time from our newsletter. But what is LatAmPolitik? Well, it is the newsletter on Latin American geopolitics that we have created together with the consulting firm Perch Perspectives. For only $5 a month, you will receive 3 political analyses in your inbox every week. In LatAmPolitik, you will discover issues as important as the one we're discussing today, but that hardly gain any attention in the traditional media. So, if you want to be well informed about what is happening in this region of the world, LatAmPolitik is the newsletter for you. You will find all the links in the description. And now, let's take a look at some history.
The Saudi Arabia of water.
I'm sure many of you have heard about the problem of water scarcity. According to many, water is going to be an increasingly scarce resource. However, if there is one continent that should not worry, it is Latin America. Latin America represents only 8% of the world's population, but accumulates 30% of the world's rainfall. To give you an idea, the reference index to measure water scarcity is the so-called Falkenmark Water Stress Indicator, named after the woman who invented it. Well, according to this index, only 3 countries in Latin America could be susceptible to what is called water stress. For example, Brazil alone is blessed with between 12 and 16% of all the fresh water in the world. In fact, many call it the Saudi Arabia of water. And it is in Brazil, more specifically in the region of Minas Gerais, that the Paraná River originates. Many of you have likely never heard of it. Yet, it is the 8th longest river in the world, if we count all its tributaries. We are talking about almost 3,000 miles. That's over 4,800 kilometers of river. Check out this map. Here you can see how the Paraná River originates in Brazil and continues through Paraguay. At the level of this country is where the most important tributary of this river is born, which is also navigable. We are talking about the Paraguay River. Afterwards, the Paraná River continues its course towards Argentina and ends up drying out near Buenos Aires. However, no matter how much flow this river has, until the 70s, the people who lived in this region were very used to droughts. However, it was in those years when the first big canalization works began. This is how the Paraná-Paraguay hydroway was born. And as surprising as it may sound to you, this project is one of South America's greatest political success stories. If Latin America is characterized by one thing, it is that none of the countries trust each other, hardly trade with each other, and have a lot of problems cooperating. For example, Mercosur was an attempt to create a free trade agreement amongst Latin American countries. But, as we have already mentioned 1,000 times on this channel, it has hardly served any purpose. However, the Paraná-Paraguay waterway is a complete success story. But what does this waterway consist of? Well, we're going to look at that right now.
The backbone of the Pampas.
I know what many of you are thinking. Where is the merit in using a river to transport goods? After all, nobody built the river. If the river is deep enough, just put boats on it and sail away, right? Well, no, it's not quite that simple. In order to send goods down a river, there needs to be a lot of infrastructure. First of all, we need to dredge the shallower sections. That is, we have to clean the bottom of the river to ensure that it will always maintain a water level that allows large ships to pass. But we also have to put in place signposts, dams, etc. We're not only talking about engineering though. The Paraná River passes through 3 different countries: Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. Therefore, to make the waterway navigable, it is necessary that these 3 countries agree. If you think that's easy, look at all the conflicts between Egypt and Ethiopia along the Nile River. However, in this case, Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay have been able to put their nationalistic fervor aside and agree something that seems unheard of in this region: freedom of navigation. In other words, ship owners on the Paraná waterway have to register, but once they have done so, they can navigate the entire river with relative freedom. What's more, if any of these countries wants to impose a tax on river transport, it has to be agreed with the others. And you'll now say, really? There truly isn't any debate on the sovereignty of the river? Well, the truth is that there are some factions of the most radical Peronism in Argentina that are calling for claiming sovereignty over the river. But we are talking about quite a minority of sectors, at least for the time being. What's more, most of the dredging work in the Argentine section of the river is being done by a private company, and not even an Argentine one. That's right. Since 1993, a Belgian company called Jean de Nul has been in charge of most of the maintenance work on the river. And now you're probably thinking, really? No one has held a protest to kick out the foreign companies from Argentina? Well, once again, there are some sectors of the more radical Peronism that are demanding that all the private companies be expelled from the river. But, for the moment, these are all minority sectors. In other words, nobody wants to touch what is working. And now you will say, but does this waterway really work so well? Well, to give you some figures, at the moment, 80% of Paraguay's imports and exports go via this river. In the case of Argentina, 70% of all the grain they export goes through the Paraná River. To give you some more idea, in 2019, the port of Rosario City came to export 79 million tons of grain. That means, according to some reports, the port of Rosario is the largest agro-exporting port hub in the world. But we're not only talking about transport, we're also talking about energy. Because along the Paraná River, there are dams. For example, the Itapu Dam and the Atacera Dam generate electricity for Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. In other words, the Paraná River is the nerve system that unites these 3 countries. And now you will say, so what has happened now? Well, we're going to check that out right now.
Playing with fire.
If there's a trending social cause in this world, it is the fight against the deforestation of the Amazon. From Madonna to Leonardo DiCaprio, every celebrity in the world has at some point protested the deforestation of the Amazon. And the question many of you are probably wondering is, are we really talking about a serious issue, or is it just a cause used to look good in front of the press gallery? Well, the truth is that the Amazon is a more serious issue than it seems. According to a study that I'll link in the description, there is a clear correlation between the deforestation and rainfall. The more hectares of forest are lost, the less rain falls. Of course, there are many quotation marks we could put here. For example, deforestation in the Amazon peaked in 2004. Since then, the rate of deforestation has been slowing. However, this does not mean that the problem has disappeared. Every year, thousands of hectares of forest land are lost. And why, you may ask? Because many people burn large areas of land in order to grow crops. At the end of the day, the forest may be very important for the environment, but its economic profitability is zero. In other words, there is a very high incentive to convert large areas of forest into arable land. And all this explains why the Brazilian government is taking measures like this one.
Brazil redeploying troops to Amazon rainforest, bans fires.
However, no matter how much Brazil sends in the army, the damage has already been done. The effects of Amazon deforestation have been felt since 2014. Since then, the city of Sao Paulo, which has more than 12 million inhabitants, has suffered frequent water cuts. However, what has happened in 2021 has been unique. It has been the Mother, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit of droughts. Check this out.
Brazil on drought alert, faces worst dry spell in 91 years.
And wait a moment, because that is not all. The problem with water scarcity in Brazil is not only felt when you turn on the tap, nor is it something that only affects farmers. Actually, it is a problem that affects the whole economy. You see, just as other countries base their energy mix on nuclear or thermal power, Brazil depends on hydroelectric power plants. Today, 65% of Brazil's energy comes from dams. Although it's true that in the last 2 decades, this country has made every effort to diversify its energy sources. To give you an idea, in 2001, hydroelectric power accounted for 90% of Brazil's energy. But no matter how much they have diversified, Brazilians are still very dependent on water. And that explains why the price per kilowatt in Brazil has now skyrocketed. It has skyrocketed to the point where decisions like this have been made.
Brazil ups bet on voluntary power rationing in the face of water crisis.
But what is this voluntary energy rationing? It's very simple. The government has reached out to large companies in Brazil and asked them to reorganize their schedules. If they manage to reduce their consumption to between 4 and 7 hours a day, the government gives them financial aid. But for the moment, Bolsonaro does not want to apply punitive measures. The question is, how long will they be able to maintain these measures? We don't know. What we do know is that Brazil is not the only country affected by the drought. It is not even the biggest victim of the crisis. The real drama is coming next, and we're going to look at that now.
Tragedy downstream.
As we said at the beginning of this video, the Paraná River originates in the Brazilian region of Minas Gerais. In other words, Brazil's drought affects all the countries through which the river flows. In Rosario, Argentina, the river level is currently below 3 feet or 1 meter, when it used to be around 10 feet or 3 meters. That means that ships have had to reduce their cargo in order to continue sailing. But we're not just talking about Argentina. Another country that is affected is Paraguay. To give you an idea, almost half of Paraguay's exports go to Brazil or Argentina. And those exports go by river. That is to say, they either go via the Paraná River or they go via the Paraguay River. It doesn't matter if it's one or the other, both are about to dry up. And that's why this country has had to take desperate measures.
Emergency law on river navigation approved and dredging works authorized.
Basically, Paraguay has had to divert a good part of the funds set aside for the coronavirus rescue to dredge the rivers. We are talking about $21 million destined to clean the beds of the Paraná and Paraguay rivers. But this is only a stopgap. The problem persists. And if Paraguay has problems, Argentina is not much better off. The drought is affecting 70 million hectares of crops. The famous Argentine pampas is drying up, and the little soya that can still be grown is almost impossible to transport. To give you an idea, the cost of Argentine exports have shot up by 300%. To put this in perspective, we are talking about a problem so serious that Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil have reached an agreement to open the Itaipu Dam to release some water to navigable rivers. But again, we are still only talking about band-aid solutions. In other words, the drought of the Paraná makes the Suez Canal crisis, which filled the front pages of so many newspapers at the time, a joke. We are talking about one of the most worrying problems at the moment, and it may be the definitive blow for Argentina. Of all the affected countries, Argentina had the worst track record. Before the coronavirus, Argentina was already suffering a devastating economic crisis. The coronavirus and the government's abysmal management has led to a massive exodus of businesses. Now, the Paraná drought is wiping out what little was left standing in this country. So now, the question is, what do you think could end up happening in Argentina? Is there any way to solve this problem? Or do they just want to wait for it to rain? Is there any way to prevent a crisis like this from happening again? You can leave your answers in the comments below. And if you want to follow this story, don't forget to visit VisualPolitik. You have all the links in the description. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, and why wouldn't you, like it, and so we can find out. And I'll see you next time.